to this vote as it passed, because this is unusual. And obviously, if you look at the reaction, long overdue.
Draft resolution contained in document S/2024/254. Please raise their hand. Those against? Abstention. The result of the voting is as follows: 14 votes in favor, 0 vote against, 1 abstention. The draft resolution has been adopted as Resolution 2728, 2024.
If you follow these unitary council resolutions, you almost never see that happen. People applauding after a vote. And you can see it's palpable because people are so relieved. It's the first time the U.S. has not blocked a resolution calling for a ceasefire, which the whole world supports, and that's why you see the applause there at the end.
Yeah. The U.S. has blocked how many? 3 so far?
At least more if you count amendments. And in this case, too, they did block an amendment, or at least they blocked wording that would call this ceasefire permanent. They changed that to lasting, I believe, because they don't want to foreclose the possibility of Israel resuming its genocide campaign. And Linda Thomas-Greenfield, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, she went out of her way to explain in her little speech on this vote that this is a non-binding resolution. So basically, if you listen to her carefully here, it's pretty clear the Biden administration's strategy is, rather than humiliate itself with yet another veto, they're going to let this one pass, but just declare that it's non-binding.
This is self-described Louisiana.
Members of this council to take some of our edits and improvements.
Sorry, next again.
No, go ahead.
This resolution. Still, certain key edits were ignored, including our request to add a condemnation of Hamas. And we did not agree with everything in the resolution. For that reason, we were unfortunately not able to vote yes. However, as I've said before, we fully support some of the critical objectives in this non-binding resolution. And we
notice how quickly she said in this non-binding resolution. She said kind of in passing, but that's their line now. So this is not actually enforceable by UN Security Council action. This is just non-binding.
Believe it was important for the council to speak out and make clear that our ceasefire any ceasefire must come with the release of all hostages. Indeed, as I've said before, the only path to a durable end to this conflict is the release of all hostages.
So there it is. It's non-binding. That's why the U.S. didn't veto it. So they let it pass, but they're also saying it's toothless.
And before we just analyze the impact of the resolution on a potential Israeli assault on Rafah and everything else, let's consider what kind of language the U.S. was trying to insert into this resolution, because we hear Linda Thomas-Greenfield complaining that it didn't condemn Hamas. Here is her discussing the U.S. the language the U.S. wanted.
And I urge all council members to vote yes, to vote for a resolution that at long last condemns Hamas for its horrific terrorist attacks and sexual violence, that makes clear that all civilians.
So the U.S. wanted to insert condemnation of Hamas for systematic mass rape on October 7th, something that to this point has been exposed as a gigantic hoax put forward by the Israeli government. And basically what they're doing is they're raising the bar so much that it's impossible to actually meet the U.S. bar, and that gives them a way to abstain, because the U.S. can't possibly vote in support of a permanent ceasefire resolution. That would never be possible. But they at least relieve the Security Council of having to deal with a U.S. veto. And for the first time, we have at least a ceasefire resolution, however non-binding it might be. This is infuriating Netanyahu. Netanyahu has pledged to withdraw a delegation he was going to send to Washington, where the Biden administration was going to plead more for them not to go into Rafah. I think the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, is already here in Washington. And it's a way of Biden screwing over Netanyahu, because he is going to be invited by House Majority Leader Mike Johnson to address a joint session of Congress in a repeat of Netanyahu's address to Congress when he stabbed Barack Obama in the back over the Iran deal at the invitation of Republican House Majority Leader John Boehner. So basically, Netanyahu is interfering in U.S. politics. This is Biden's way of getting him back. It's the second abstention we've seen maybe in the last decade of a resolution that Israel opposed. The other one was on Israeli settlement activity. The Obama administration abstained. So basically, this has a lot to do with U.S. domestic politics, and the Biden administration also I don't think they could afford to just veto another ceasefire at this point, with famine looming, with every aid agency operating in the region, warning of imminent famine. I think it was a little extreme. So it really just shows up over the sham they was trying to pull at the UN. Let's listen to like 30 seconds of the Guyanese delegation explaining why they cannot support the U.S. resolution.
Contrary to some media and other reports, this resolution does not call for an immediate ceasefire. Instead, we note that it, and I quote, determines the imperative for a ceasefire, end of quote, and calls for support for diplomatic efforts that are ongoing outside of the UN. The demand for a ceasefire should not be linked to or conditioned on the release of hostages. Two wrongs cannot make a right, and the Palestinians people should not be collectively punished and themselves held hostage for the crime of.
So, I mean, pretty plainly spoken. And what she's saying is the U.S. is trying to deprive the Palestinians, force them to give up all their negotiating leverage, and basically end all negotiations for the release of their.
There is no country that seeks to avoid an operation in Rafah more than Israel. Is it your sons and daughters that you are sending into battle? No, it is our children who are making the ultimate sacrifice in defense of their homeland. The only way to achieve a real and permanent ceasefire is to eliminate Hamas's capabilities entirely. And this cannot happen unless all of their battalions are demolished. You cannot extinguish a fire by putting out most of it. The fire will grow again and spread. This is what will happen without an operation in Rafah.
Well, I'm glad he's replaced his Nuremberg Law era Jewish star with just the ribbon that celebrities wore at the Oscars. But consider the logic there. There can't be a ceasefire without a gigantic massacre in an area where 1.5 million refugees are concentrated in order to dismantle the Hamas battalions that Israel has failed to dismantle in the north. Why are they at Al-Shifa Hospital? We'll talk about this later. Why is Israel blowing up the surgical ward of Al-Shifa Hospital? Why are they carrying out field executions outside Al-Shifa? Why are they arresting all the journalists there? Because they failed to demolish Hamas in the north, where they withdrew their troops. So they totally failed militarily. The John Kirby, the U.S. did have a warning, some kind of warning for Americans in Moscow.
I've noticed all Americans in Moscow to avoid any large gathering, concerts, obviously shopping malls, anything like that, just for their own safety. They should stay put where they are and stay plugged into the State Department for any additional updates and information.
The U.S. had prior knowledge of this attack in Moscow, given that the U.S. Embassy had issued warning beforehand.
I'm not aware of any advance knowledge that we had of this terrible attack. Put out a note.
So, I mean, that was unusual. what's his name? I'm forgetting his name. He was on Fareed Zakaria yesterday. He's one of these Kremlinologists, and the name isn't coming to me. But he basically said the U.S. really like nailed it and showed its intelligence prowess by warning Americans in advance that something was coming in Moscow. But